After a few quiet years, there have been headlines again about possible independence for Catalonia in the northeast of Spain. 3 MEPs from that region who work in Brussels and are fighting for self-government at home now face a legal battle to avoid extradition to Spain. This is Roundtable. Hello and welcome from me, David Foster. But why is Spain so worried about Catalonia? And what does this mean for other parts of Europe that may want to break away? The European Parliament recently voted to withdraw immunity for the former Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, and 2 of his ministers, Antoni Comín and Clara Ponsati.
It is a sad day for European Parliament. We have lost our immunity, but the European Parliament has lost more than that. And as a result, European democracy too. This is a clear case of political persecution.
The 3 politicians left Spain to avoid arrest after a failed independence referendum, which a Spanish court ruled was illegal. In September of 2017, the Catalan Parliament approved the independence vote, despite a legal ruling that it was unconstitutional. The following month came the referendum. 90% of those who turned out were in favour of separation. The police were accused of using violence to try to disrupt the voting. Soon after, Puigdemont and other senior figures fled Spain as arrest warrants were issued. Rebellion and sedition were among the charges against them. More than 3 years later, losing parliamentary immunity means they face extradition to Spain and likely prosecution. In recent regional elections in Catalonia, pro-independence parties took more than half of the votes. So no matter what happens to Puigdemont, is Catalonia's independence fight still a problem for Spain and a problem for Europe? I'm very pleased to be able to say we go first to Brussels for this edition of Roundtable, where we see Beatriz Rios, who is a European Union reporter. Then to Catalonia, Barcelona, the capital, Marc Sanjaume-Calvet, lecturer in political science at the Open University of Catalonia, and also in Barcelona, Guifre Jordan, deputy editor for Catalan News. Marc, you first of all, this decision to lift immunity for the 3 politicians, what effect has that had on the discussion about independence in Catalonia?
Well, certainly it has had an important effect in the sense that this is a deception coming from the European Parliament for those supporting independence. A lot of people expected this immunity to be maintained for these deputies. But at the same time, if we take into account the approach that the majority of European institutions have had during the last years, we cannot say this has been a surprise, in the sense that a lot of people expected these conservative parties, most conservative parties, voting against immunity. And people understand that, well, this judicial legal debate continues in the European Union for these Catalan leaders.
Has it given a boost to the call for independence?
Well, I think that we are already in a situation in which the positions are more or less established among the electorate. Of course, support for and against independence changes over time, but these kind of debates are somehow part of current politics nowadays, of day-by-day politics, and I don't think this has meant a boost. This might reinforce the position of those already supporting independence, and might include some uncertainty on the path for self-determination and independence, given the fact that one more time we can see the European institutions being very far from these demands.
Guifre, let me come to you. Would it be fair to say that over the last few years, since 2017, when there was the referendum in Catalonia, the argument for it, that the momentum for independence has fallen away a little bit?
Well, the intensity of the debate on independence is not as high as in 2017. The independence push was in 2017 with this independence referendum not authorized by Spain, but a referendum that took place anyway, organized by the Catalan government. Now, after all that intense autumn, 4 years ago, it is true, it is fair to say that the debate is not intense. It's not as intense. The temperature of the political arena in Catalonia is not as high. But I wouldn't say that the pro-independence camp has lost supporters either. So they are not as active now. But 1 month ago, exactly 1 month ago, a Catalan election was held, and there were more. The vote share for independence was as high as ever. So it was, for the first time, the pro-independence support surpassed 50% of the ballots. We also have to say that it was with this pandemic, and this frame of the pandemic, and the turnout was much lower than usual. But still, this pandemic affects one side and the other side in the same way.
These three politicians were given immunity because they became members of the European Parliament. They were accused of committing crimes before they became MEPs. Do many people in Catalonia really care about the fact that they no longer have immunity? Wouldn't it be fair to say that it's a general feeling that they should come back and face justice?
Well, I must say that the immunity is just one step of many steps in their extradition processes. So I think it's not the most key element in the whole discussion. So people are probably, what would be more interesting is to know how their extradition processes end, because for instance, Spain has tried to extradite them ever since the 2017 independence referendum for over 3 years, and it has failed. After 3 attempts, it has failed, but the thing hasn't ended. Now their immunity has been lifted, so their extradition process will continue in the Belgian and Scottish courts. So that will be the key moment. This immunity, I'd say, it is not the most essential part of the debate.
Okay. I do understand it's just a part of the process. And Scotland being mentioned because, of course, one of those who've had their immunity lifted was a professor in Scotland for some time. Beatriz, let me come to you and ask you this one. The European Union's pretty much tried to stay out of this over the course of the last 4 years. But with the Parliament lifting this immunity, it puts itself right centre stage regarding the independence argument, not just in Catalonia, but in other places as well.
Well, obviously, the moment that these three Catalan politicians were elected to the European Parliament, the issue of the Catalan independence was brought into the heart of the European democracy. And we knew that eventually it would come to this moment. It's interesting to look at the results of the vote that led to the waiving of the immunity of these three MEPs, because obviously we look at the others that the same day were voted, the difference is much lower. And I think it reflects the divide that we see in Europe when it comes to the Catalan independence. On the one hand, because obviously at the European Parliament, there is other separatist movements represented by other MEPs, and they were therefore showing their support to the cause. There is also the question that some people do consider that this is a political conflict, and this should be resolved via political means and not through the process of the judicial process that we have seen over the past few years. But also the representatives of these different countries where there are regional separatist movements are represented in the European Parliament as well, and therefore wanted to preserve this process to be and to show that the process works if ever this would happen in any other country. But the European Union hasn't actually changed their position anyway.
Would it be fair to say that it's rather embarrassing for the European Union to see the debate about independence in Spain, in this case in Catalonia, brought up again and making headlines once more, when it would much rather sort of see it left to individual countries rather than the institution of the EU itself?
Well, I think because there are so many separatist movements within the European Union, having this debate is inevitably, and this is something that we have seen before, not only about Catalonia, but also about Scotland as well. But the position of the European Union has always been the same. They have been trying to stay away of it and respect this as a national issue, both in the case of Scotland years ago and now with the Catalan issue as well. And again, we have to remember that this is not something that is exclusive to Spain or the UK, which is no longer a member of the European Union, but we have separatist movements in France with Corsica, in Italy with South Tyrol, in Germany with Bavaria, and obviously the European Union wants to make sure that it preserves the immunity, and this is the unity. And this is something that we have seen before with other presidents of the European Commission, not only with Mrs. von der Leyen at the moment, but also with Juncker, with Barroso, and with Prodi before. So the stand of the European Commission trying to stay away out of these debates that they consider national is nothing new, and it hasn't changed with the conflict in Catalonia, even if it definitely made headlines for over 3 years.
Interesting, but perhaps for another day, that many of those areas that seem to want independence are the more wealthy, including Catalonia. But let's hear now from Arantxa González-Laya, who's Spain's foreign minister, on a possible way forward.
Catalonia's problems are solved in Spain. They are not solved in Europe. This is a line that the Spanish government has maintained by reaching out to all Catalan political forces to find a solution to Catalonia's problems through dialogue and negotiation.
So there she says, Spain's foreign minister, that there is the possibility of a solution, some kind of negotiations. That is central government saying that. What is the Catalan parliament and government saying?
Well, this is very important. This is an important question because until very recently, the Catalan government was skeptic on this possibility. The former coalition in government was officially supporting these talks, but the party, the president's party, Junts per Catalunya, was less enthusiastic on this solution. But the recent results, the results we have seen in the last elections, somehow support this idea of a negotiated solution, because the first among the pro-independence party, this Republican leftist party for independence, this party is now more moderate and supports the idea of a negotiated solution. And there is also an important element here, because this party, this leftist party, has been supporting Pedro Sánchez government in Madrid. So what we see now is a change in the landscape. What we see is that the new Catalan government that will be formed during the following weeks could change the situation and could be more willing to accept this table of negotiation. On the other hand,
in what way? What concessions would it make that the previous government in Catalonia was not prepared to make? What concessions?
I don't think that we are in a moment in which we should talk about concessions. This is not the exact word. I think that talks could be about a referendum on independence, but can also be on self-government more in general, and also on amnesty, on pardon for the political prisoners. And if all these options are on the table, and the new Catalan president is ready to accept that one of these options will be the one addressed in these talks, then the talks could take place and could continue. At the same time, the Spanish government should be ready to do one of these, to pursue one of these ways.
You bring up what you call political prisoners. I'm going to ask Guifre if you would explain to our viewers, apart from the three politicians we've talked about who are not imprisoned, a number of Catalonian politicians did face jail sentences. Are they still behind bars? There was talk of a day release, then that was withdrawn. What is the position with them?
Yes, well, basically, in the wake of the 2017 declaration and subsequent the referendum and declaration of independence in autumn 2017, half of the Catalan government decided to go to Belgium into exile, as they say, and some others decided to stay. Therefore, they ended up, after a trial, 9 of them ended up behind bars in decade-long sentences for sedition and misuse of funds. It was six government members, one parliament speaker, and two leading activists. So they are all serving their sentences. Now they are final sentences. Well, basically, since they are in Catalan prisons, and since the Catalan government is in charge of managing prisons in Catalonia, so the government granted them some day lives, regular day lives, so that they only had to.
But that was then withdrawn, was it not?
4 days a week, actually, and the rest of the time.
Yeah, but didn't another judge then say, "Sorry, you're not going to have day release anymore"?
Correct.
It's a bit confusing.
Yeah, there's been a bit of back and forth in the past 9 months or so. So the Catalan government granted these leaves. Then a court revoked it, and well, there were some appeals. And since this decision of granting day leaves has to be reviewed every 6 months, we are witnessing the same story over 6 months a little bit. So
okay,
they are granted
well,
leaves, and then these are revoked by Spanish
I
courts.
asked this question, and we'll come back to it in just a moment, because I wanted to go to Beatriz and a suggestion. I think that in Brussels, Carles Puigdemont has lost some political weight.
Well, I think it's not so much in Brussels as if in Catalonia. He has been in Belgium for over 3 years, and obviously the situation in Catalonia has been evolving ever since. And the way that he has politically, when he was still in Spain, is way different, because at the time he was the president of the government back in Catalonia. So obviously being in Brussels, isolated and more concentrated on his work as an MEP, has done him any favor as a representative of the Catalan people. But obviously now he was fighting his way out of this situation and trying to get back to Spain and keep on, as they said, and that was the intention of the representatives of the Catalan government, were here. It was to internationalize the question of Catalonia. I think they were very successful at the beginning. We saw, even as a reporter, I saw that there was a lot of interest on the international media every time that there was an event. There was one when the procedure started to try to extradite them as well. But we have seen also a lack of interest over the past few years, and we even saw it with the waiving of the immunity, that the international media are no longer so interested in what's happening in Catalonia, maybe because they didn't see any actual concrete movement in the region anyway.
Guifre, let me put this one to you, and then I'll come to you, Marc, on it. Therefore, do you think, bearing in mind what we've heard from Beatriz, that Carles Puigdemont is not necessarily the future of independence in Catalonia? And if the answer to that is he is not, who is?
It's hard to say, to be honest. It's hard to say because I think he still remains a very important piece in the pro-independence camp. Beatriz is right. So the momentum he had when he exiled in 2017 and the attention he dragged by all the international media, he has no longer this attention. But it is also true that since he's in exile, some contradictions between European justice systems have arose. So, for instance, Spain has tried to extradite him for 3 times. Belgium has rejected him, has not him, but other cabinet members of his 2017 government. Germany didn't accept his extradition for rebellion, which is one of the crimes Spain was requesting him for. So it's true that his momentum is not now maybe as high as in 2017, but it is he and the other exiles are still generating debate in the EU, and sooner or later this debate will be on top of the headlines again once the whole extradition process produces some outcome, some final outcome. I'm sure they will again hit the headlines.
Sure. Let's bring up on screen a tweet from Junt, the political party headed by Carles Puigdemont, which says, "We will not give up. The political conflict between Catalonia and Spain has stopped being an internal affair. We have brought it to the heart of Europe." And Marc, bearing in mind what we've heard perhaps about Puigdemont's lack of power within Catalonia at the moment, he's arguing about it being at the center of Europe. But what happens within Catalonia itself. What is the future for independence, with or without him?
I agree with what Guifre said on the future of Carles Puigdemont. There are two elements here. One element is that the future of the independentist movement in Catalonia can evolve, and in fact is evolving towards, I think, a different situation, a situation in which the strategy is probably more similar to the SNP during the last decade. This is a gradualist strategy based on public policy, based on reinforcing self-government, and so on and so forth. And what explains that is this change in terms of leadership, and the fact that the first pro-independence party now is this leftist Republican Party, and is not Junts anymore. On the other hand, I also want to say that this is not only about Carles Puigdemont as a person or as an individual. Carles Puigdemont was the president of Catalonia, and there is an institutional dimension here. And obviously, one day when this negotiation table or whatever takes place, this situation will have to be discussed. Carles Puigdemont, again, not as an individual, as a president of Catalonia, had the support of a majority of the Catalan parliament and was the legitimate president of Catalonia, and he was prosecuted, and he had to flee to Belgium, and he has faced justice in Belgium and in other countries, but obviously, he didn't come back to Spain because he knows that in Spain he will not have a fair process. And that's,
okay. I'm going to go back to Brussels, Marc. Thank you very much indeed for that. And my question for you, Beatriz, is what would the European Union's position be on possibly eventual independence for Catalonia, or indeed for any other smaller areas of their constituent countries?
First of all, it's very important to notice that the EU doesn't have the competence of recognizing a state if it would become independent. That's a competence for the member states. So it would eventually be the 27 members of the European Union who will have to recognize or not that new country that would be formed after following a process of independence. That's first thing. The second thing it's important to notice is that the EU has always been very uncomfortable with separatist regional movements. And we saw that during the 2014 referendum in Scotland, even at that time where the vote was actually agreed with the British authorities, and it was something that it was recognized by both parties, the EU was not very comfortable with the idea that Scotland would eventually become independent, because they needed to decide how the process was going to go if they decided to join the EU. And this is something that has been discussed as well in the case of Catalonia. What happened if eventually Catalonia becomes an independent country, whether they would have to go through the procedure of joining the EU. And that is the position that the Commission has had, that any new independent country would have to apply like any other country to join the EU. And here the thing is that it requires unanimity again on the member states. I see it's very hard,
which may be very difficult, may it not, when you've actually got 27 countries trying to agree, and you have one of them being Spain itself. So we'll have to wait.
Not only Spain, but again, as I explained, there are many countries in the EU where there are separatist movements, and they are not going to be very happy to fool those movements to become independent themselves. Even Juncker, before he left the Commission, he was saying, I don't imagine an European Union when we have 100 of states, because that would definitely not be a union of unity in a globalized world. So I see that the European Union has been struggling quite a lot with these movements, that they have just maintained their neutrality because they believe that this is a national question, but then at the same time, they are openly not very comfortable with this possibility.
Yeah, it's a dilemma, isn't it? But what about the process? It's going to be at least a year, I understand, before it gets to the courts.
We have to take into consideration several things. So as my other counterparts were saying before, this is just the first step. So now there is a waiving of the immunity. First of all, Carles Puigdemont himself, he has contested the decision before the European Court of Justice, because he thinks that the procedure was not followed appropriately. But then at the same time, we also have the Spanish authorities questioning the European Court of Justice over the procedure of the European arrest warrant, which is the demand of extradition that they posed to Belgium, precisely because indeed it has been rejected before, and they want to understand if the interpretation that the Belgian authorities did of the case was appropriate or not. So these two cases have to be resolved first, and then we will eventually see how the judicial process follows both in Belgium and in Scotland, and that eventually is going to take months, if not years.
Listen, I thank you very, very much indeed. There were so many other questions I had and so many points I'm sure that you wanted to get across, but time was against us. I hope we return to this in the near future. Listen, thank you very much indeed, Beatriz in Brussels and Marc and Guifre in Barcelona. Much appreciated, your time and your expertise. And wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable, our thanks go out to you. We're available on YouTube, so many more episodes. That's Roundtable TRT World on YouTube. From me, David Foster, and the team, until next time, goodbye.